Good morning, everyone. We're back in the special business meeting for the District of Squamish. Next up on our agenda is the Squamish NTCF. I'll let you explain the acronym.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Gary Buxton, General Manager here at the District, and Dave Miller, Director of Major Projects. So the National Trade Corridor Fund, we've progress update for you as to where we're at. It's Transport Canada and the Federal Government's program. Large budget, $1 billion to help infrastructure projects. In our case, it would be marine transportation, ports and marine transportation facilities to facilitate flow of goods and flow of trade in and out of Canada. It's a long-term program, spread over 11 years into 2028. The last saw this, I believe, it was in March when we discussed our joint application with Squamish Terminals for a project that has three elements: the dredging of the west berth, and then the district's portion of the project is the 3rd Avenue Bridge and the Pemberton Laurel Bridge, which connects Pemberton to the waterfront landing project on the other side of the Blind Channel. We did submit an expression of interest with the terminals on April the 5th. We received notification on May 6th that EOI was accepted, and we were now willing or able to submit what's called a CPP, or Comprehensive Project Proposal. The deadline for that is coming up rather quickly, hence the update. We will be back to Council on or before July 5th. So those are the three projects. Top right hand corner is the west berth that is the dredging part of the project. Bottom left is the 3rd Avenue Bridge with the tide gates in the background, and the illustration top left is the Pemberton Bridge plans we have today. They're fairly rough and ready at this point in time. Both of our projects, well, one is in the DCC bylaw as it is, so it's already on our to-do books. The second one is going to go into the new DCC bylaw when those amendments come forward. In terms of next steps and timelines, comprehensive project proposal needs to be in by July 5th. Squamish Terminals is doing the heavy lifting on this with their consultant, assembling all the necessary information, with a transportation consultant to do all the cost-benefit analyses, make sure we meet the program objectives. They are going out to seek stakeholder letters of support. Those requests will be going out tomorrow. And then the assembly and submission of that proposal. Our part of the work is more detailed bridge construction costs, which we're funding through operational consulting fees in our budgets, in a way that's going to support both this project and the DCC bylaw. We'll get better numbers for the DCC bylaw for both of those projects that we have. We then need to do a detailed sort of long-term bridge funding scenarios. You've previously seen a spreadsheet, and I can provide a copy. That looked at expenses. What we'll need to do now is look at the corresponding revenues and expenses out of the DCC reserves over the next 10 years. And then we'll review that prior to the CPP submission with Council. We do need to provide a confirmation of funding. So that's a very poor example of the spreadsheet that you've seen before. If you do want to see it again, we've got hard copies here for you. The only thing that's missing on that are the revenue lines that we need to look at and compare that to the anticipated expenses. That is the funding commitment that we will need to provide on or before July 5th as part of the CPP application. So we're proceeding forwards with, on our side, we're doing the bridge estimation work and then looking at funding and revenue expenses for those bridges. We'll flow that into the work that Squamish Terminals is doing as part of the application. So it's all coming relatively quickly, but we will be back late June to provide some, as best we can, financial modelling for how the application will proceed. Of course, we do need to provide that funding commitment as part of the CPP application.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Anderson.
Yes, the 3rd Avenue Bridge Replacement Project, is there or could there be drainage improvement works involved with that vicinity? Are there any upgrades not related to the bridge itself that are part of the planning or could be of that project?
I think Mr. Mayor is either going to kick me under the table or not. No, there's no work proposed on the tide gate structure. No work.
Continue.
If I could just add, through Mayor, there has been some fairly recent studies done, or one in particular, a hydraulic assessment of that.
Right.
And if I recall correctly, it determined that no immediate action is required for those. So as Gary alluded to, we wouldn't be upgrading as part of this project.
We're actually in the process, I think are there 4 or 5 tide gates? I think we're budgeted 1 replacement for the next 4 or 5 years, so that work is actually ongoing.
Do you have a follow-up?
Yes, I wondered with respect to the Westworth dredging, the dredge spoil itself, perhaps it may be of lesser value because of the nature of the material, but what will be the disposition of that dredge spoil? Will that be factored into the application? Will you be using the house on dumping site, or is there possibly for repurposing that dredge spoil?
I can speak to that. The terminals has been actively looking for uses and use for that material. We did look as part of the oceanfront development. We did some geotechnical assessment to see whether it would be suitable for use in the park, the oceanfront park. Unfortunately, the material is not of suitable quality for that sort of structural fill. We met with the terminals 2 weeks ago, and they're still looking for potential applications for that material, but it may end up being that it is ocean dumped. Yet to be determined.
Thank you.
Councillor Pagano.
2 questions. One, can you remind me in terms of funding buckets and so on, our obligations, will it be competing with other things, like, for example, if we have other capital or real estate sort of projects we need to think about? Are these funds completely separate, or is there possible competition there?
Through the Mayor, there is potential competition. That's what we need to determine. The principal question is, can the DCC reserves fund the amount that we need to provide? If the answer is yes, or likely yes, then the competition is nil. If the answer is no, then there is competition between other capital projects. That's what we need to provide to Council with some reasonable detail between now and July 5th.
The other, a piece of this presumably is increased large vessel traffic, or maybe just larger vessels. So in terms of cumulative impacts, we've got the wood fiber project, which may also mean an increase in significant vessel traffic, and keep on hearing in the news about stresses and deaths of large marine mammals. Is there anyone with responsibility right now for kind of looking at these cumulative or likely cumulative impacts and sort of assessing what this might mean, what our next steps would be if we see there's a problem down the road, or is it that's just not part of this process and no one's really looking at that?
Can we test one assumption there, that this means larger vessels? I thought it just meant better navigation for the vessels coming, because
That would be a question that I would have to get confirmation from the terminals. My understanding was it was to maintain, it's necessary to maintain current operations. I will confirm whether or not it results in larger and or more vessels. So we will get that answer for you. In terms of the cumulative assessment, unless that is being done as part of the wood fibre work, I don't know of any other project that's assessing marine traffic other than that. And offhand, I don't know how extensive that cumulative effect is. Other than that, I'm not aware of any project to do cumulative assessments on marine traffic outside of Wood Fibre.
Any other questions? What's the funding window? So if we're successful, the money has to be spent.
Between now and March 2028, it's a lot. The financial model has our projects out in 2025 to 2027 and 2024 to 2026. So there are ways out before we get to actually do it.
So this was an update, you don't need a motion from us?
Correct.
No other questions, council? All right,
Thank you.
good luck. We have staff updates, one from community planning on the UBCM childcare grant.
I'll go
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it should be on momentarily.
Very good. Welcome, Ms. McJannet.
Thank you so much, Council. The purpose today is to provide a brief update on the provincial childcare grants that were received this spring and our progress with respect to grant activities and how we're managing different components of the work. And first, this slide above that you can see for context and shared understanding presents some key milestones in terms of our involvement with childcare planning over the last sort of 12 to 18 months. So in the winter of 2017/2018, the previous council contributed some top-up funding to support development of a local childcare needs assessment and strategy. And this work was led by the Putting Children's First initiative, the early years planning table with partners. This was necessary work that was identified and kind of coming up during our Healthy Community deep dive work in the community. So similar to affordable housing, childcare needs have been front and center. And this was also reflected in our 2040 OCP, which included policy support for the district to work in partnership to help to facilitate quality, accessible childcare in Squamish. Upon its completion, the childcare needs assessment and strategy was endorsed by Council in October of 2018. And at the same time, some grant funding opportunity was released by the province. So we came to Council and discussed that, and Council of the day supported those applications. And then we brought back our two applications for two specific grants in January 2019 to get authorization to submit grant applications on behalf of the district. So just got a couple slides here. So the first grant, there were two grants available for local governments in BC. The district was successful in receiving both grants. The first was for $25,000. It supports local childcare action planning and engagement. We were one of 70 communities in BC that received this grant. It's a 12-month project, and the work involves working with childcare agencies, operators, advocates, and families to create tangible actions, advanced tangible actions to create new space, and also work through different barriers and challenges that families are facing, as well as operators and providers. And there's also a specific focus around helping to support underserved populations in the community. So those may be single parents, low-income families, young families, new immigrants, Indigenous family, children also that require extra support. So really quickly, our work for this grant will involve updating our childcare space inventory, specifying detailed targets on a neighborhood basis. The grant was awarded in March, a funding agreement was signed, and we have 12 months to work through this action planning in the community. It's kind of an extension of work that the Putting Children's First table has been doing. We put out an EOI for action planning support and contracted some help in early April. We are developing an engagement program and working with partners in the community. That work will happen sort of June through March of next year to undertake the work that I've described. We're also putting together a project webpage to highlight this grant, what work is happening. There's a lot of things happening in the community, and we know that people are interested to know what's happening with respect to childcare in the community. So that's grant number 1. Grant number 2 was for new space creation in a public facility within a local government facility to be operated by a nonprofit childcare provider. So we were successful in receiving $851,000 for a new childcare facility. We applied for this second grant in partnership with School District 48 as well as Sea to Sky Community Services. We were successful in the proposal that we created to co-locate a purpose-built facility on a local school site. And this was also important given the district has a limited ability to integrate childcare within existing facilities, given the planning and master planning that's underway. But the school district was very open to this idea and already does have a number of in-school and purpose-built facilities on their school sites. So the project will deliver hopefully 36 new spaces, so 12 for infant mothers for the little ones, as well as 24 group care spaces for 30 months to school age, and those were specified within the funding opportunity. So again, grant was awarded and the funding agreement was signed in March. This is a 24-month project to complete for March 2021. We've held a number of partner meetings through the grant application development and then post notification that we were successful. So School District 48 is the site host. So Sea to Sky Community Services is named as the nonprofit operator. We issued an RFP for design services and project management for that was in May, and that's closing shortly. This project will require an agreement with the school district, a lease to site a municipal, basically a purpose-built facility on a school district property. Valley Cliff Elementary is the location that was identified in our work with the partner. And also one of the funding requirements for the local government for the funds received is a requirement for the facility to operate for a minimum of 15 years. And this is, I understand, fairly typical for funding like this. And the operating agreement term was based on the amount of funds that were received. So lastly, through our work and project activities, we're actively working to anticipate and make plans to manage uncertainties. So the first uncertainty, and for clarity, around the maximum project funding. So we have a ceiling of $851,000, both for the design and the soft costs, as well as the construction and the building fit out for the daycare. We developed a budget based on for the application, and it was based on a certain amount of pre-design and some preliminary site review that we conducted for the application stage. And so also we had the benefit of looking at closely at costs that were undertaken by the recent facility that was built at Garibaldi Highlands Elementary. So that was a project that was completed in a year and built out. So one uncertainty and risk is where the costs creep or exceed the available funding. We will need to either adjust the scope for the project in terms of the overall costing for the facility through finishing and different components there. And we also have an opportunity to look for alternative funding, although grant funding is, there's additional sort of new spaces funds, but we wanted to make council aware that we do still hold some funds within our childcare reserve that we ended up bringing in through different rezonings over the last couple of years, so there's a little bit of a buffer there. And second, there's a uncertainty around project timeline, so that's another risk that we're managing for. And so we have a 24-month window. If we are delayed for any reason, we would look to seek an extension from UBCM. That's already outlined in our funding agreement. They already out of the gate highlight there's a process to apply for funding or for project extensions. And then finally, the other risk is around the long-term operating of the childcare facility. So if the operator ceases operations prior to the 15 years, and again, that was the minimum operating commitment that is involved through this grant funding, we would then be in a place where we would need to source a new nonprofit operator. On that note, Sea Sky Community Services was brought on from the very start and a partner in our grant application. We anticipated that we would have some sort of success in the grant application if we went in with a partner agreement. Sea Sky Community Services has been operating childcare facilities within the corridor for a number of decades. They have facilities already within schools and in purpose-built facilities on school sites, so that was already an established kind of partnership. So we tagged on to that. Childcare is a core service for Sea Sky Community Services. In any event, that is a risk that we will need to manage for should long-term operating not succeed. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions that council has on this project, these projects.
Thank you. Any questions?
I recall that during our discussion of the grant application scenario in January that we were preoccupied with some impacts on planning department staff, because we have a number of projects underway which you, Ms. McJannet, are engaged in as well. And I wonder if there's any more clarity today as to how the department will manage, because presumably, as we identified then, there will be some real demands on planning department staff for the next coming months. Is there any more clarity on this?
Yeah, I'll start, and then if Mr. Buxton would like to add to that. So when we were successful with the grant application and through our annual work planning and through the budget process, we sat down together as a work team and looked at the different projects that I am involved in and helping to support. And so we did make some adjustments around my involvement in projects such as short-term rental regulations. So I've been playing a supporting role in some of those projects. So we have been adjusting the work. And also for the childcare action planning, for clarity, the funds and the way that we approached that grant application was to bring on support, and so those funds are helping to support action planning consultant that's going to be working in community doing that work. So that's not me doing that work day to day, it's helping to supervise and work in collaboration with partners around that work. Would Jonas or Gary like to add to that?
Yeah, if I may, Mayor, we've, as Sarah said, we've anticipated that this project is going to come to us, and so we've adjusted our work plans. And Sarah, on both projects, Sarah is going to be the lead on our end, but there's going to be other project managers involved. So with the childcare facility, we're expecting that the project is going to be managed in terms of trades and everything technical with the project by somebody who's going to be part of the soft cost of the interactive one. $1,000.
Continue.
Thank you. I wonder if we may be able to go back to the earlier slide. I just want a clarification where there's a reference to design services and project management. That is specifically building design and construction project management, just to be clear about those. And I take it that the RFP has already gone out.
Correct. Through the mayor, those are for the childcare facility design and construction and project management.
Thank you.
Council Payne.
Just, it's a little bit tangential, but just so I understand the funding and so on, as I understand, this is money that the province gives to UBCM to administer. So essentially it's provincial money and UBCM is administering it? Is that correct?
Correct.
Any other questions? Is 15 years hopefully daycare can last longer than 15 years? Is the school district reluctant to offer a longer lease, or just that's a starting point, or is there a option to renew?
To that point, the minimum operating period is a commitment that we're making to the funder, so to the parents. The lease for the school district will be, we're going to seek and negotiate a long-term lease. We've been asking questions just of the existing scenario for these other purpose-built facilities that are sitting on school district properties, and my understanding is that those are long-term leases for the foreseeable future. The school district has been very, very supportive with the co-location piece, and we understand that that's really part of a mandate coming from Ministry of Education around schools being early learning centers, and so the Board of Education has been really supportive as we've gone through this process for long term.
On the planning table side of things, I certainly received a number of letters over the last little while because we have a daycare that's closing, which puts a lot of families in a pretty stressful situation. I know we have staff representation at the table, but I think the work of council is to lobby government. And so is there going to be regular reporting from the table so that council is aware of where we see barriers locally and what we need to be advocating for, not just here, but probably across the corridor, so that I can work with my colleagues across Sea to Sky? I don't think we're the only community that's struggling with daycare. But I'm just wondering sort of the timeline and when we can start to really take some action from a political level as well.
For sure. The 12-month action planning process, we are finalizing the engagement program that it also includes the project charter, which has enough, council touch points with that. So we are more than happy to bring some sort of midpoint check-ins with council, or it could also just be for information, and you can follow along. We will be doing a lot of external communication through partners and with the collaborators in the community, and so the main way that we'll be doing that is through our project webpage as well, so we can highlight different things that we've been learning. The childcare needs assessment and strategy that was done brought a lot of the struggles and the different issues to light, so we are still working from that childcare needs assessment and going a bit deeper in a bunch of different areas. Certainly in the last 2 weeks, I've talked to a number of families within Squamish because there are several private daycares that are at risk of closing, and some of the key struggles around that continue to be sort of staffing and whatnot. So while new space creation is good, there's some other struggles that we are absolutely facing as well, and the district will have some influence in those areas, but we're also, as part of the bigger picture, it's coming back to cost of living and housing and all those other things that we're trying to work to ameliorate as well. So.
Mayor Elliott, through you, I do need to add a logistical issue here. As council is well aware, when we are funded by a grant, we still, in the financial plan, indicate the money as an expense, but funded from a grant. This grant is not currently indicated in our financial plan as an expense, And so in terms of the timing of the project, the actual commencing construction will be delayed slightly, although staff are confident, and I know Mr. Buxton can perhaps speak to the timing, that the initial work, we potentially have funds to begin, and then by the time the actual larger project is underway, ideally moving into the next financial plan bylaw. I don't know if our CFO, Gary, through you may want to clarify that further, but it is definitely a timing issue in terms of it not, we can't spend this money yet until next year. With the new financial plan, assuming council gets it.
I'm assuming that's when we're into our 24-month project timeline.
Yes, yes.
Any other questions? We have so much work to do in this area, but it's a start. And, the province really needs to step up on this issue and figure out the pay scale for these folks, the ongoing training. And we need to keep working on what we can do around affordable housing and creating the space, and make sure the partners are at the table and we know what more we can do. But, we still have to see the province really take some bolder action on helping us solve this problem. So, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. A quick update from the terminals on a question that was asked.
The dredging for the West Berth is only to maintain current operations. It's not to increase the size or frequency of the ships.
I was watching.
Okay, so 12 minutes ahead of schedule. Proud of us. Motion to close. Moved by Councilor Herbert, seconded by Councilor Stoner. All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. Thank you.